I'm Nicole, 33, and I live in Denver, Colorado. When people ask why I'm so independent, to the point of being distant from my family, I just smile and change the subject. It's not that I don't want to talk about it, but I know they wouldn't understand. If they hadn't lived in a home where one child was worshipped and the other treated like a shadow, I was the shadow. My brother, Brandon, is 4 years older than me. He was the firstborn, the pride and joy of our parents, Margaret and Stanley. To them, Brandon was everything: the family's future, the heir, the gifted one. It didn't matter what he did. We grew up in a 2-story house in the suburbs near Colorado Springs, with 3 small bedrooms, a little fenced-in backyard, and an old swing I was never allowed to sit on for too long because it was Brandon's spot. My dad was an electrician, and my mom worked part-time as a librarian. Their whole world revolved around their only son. I remember when Brandon shattered our neighbor's window playing indoor soccer, even though our parents had told him not to. When the angry neighbor called, my mom just chuckled. Boys will be boys. He's just a little energetic. But me, I broke a dish doing the dishes at 9 years old, and my dad dragged me into the living room, snapping, "Nicole, you need to be more careful. Don't cause more trouble." In 5th grade, I won first place in a statewide writing contest for a story about baking cookies with grandma. I rushed home, hands shaking with excitement, holding the certificate. My mom glanced at it and said, "That's nice. Now go clean your room. Dr. Miller is coming over soon." That same day, Brandon was given $20 to buy a new video game because he passed his biology exam with a C-. I'm not kidding. For a long time, I believed that if I just tried harder, studied more, or behaved better, my mom would look at me the way she looked at Brandon. But that look never belonged to me. I was the one clearing dishes, babysitting, standing behind the camera during Christmas photos. Whether I wore a pretty dress or old pajamas, I was still Brandon's little sister, never just Nicole. Brandon could skip class, oversleep, even get suspended for 3 days after fighting, and Mom would still cook him a special dinner so he could regain his strength. If I caught a fever and stayed in bed, I had to make instant noodles for myself if I didn't want to go hungry. I once overheard my dad telling a neighbor, "Brandon just needs the right mentor. He's got real potential." As for me, I never once heard him say I was capable of anything. When I earned a full scholarship to the University of Oregon, my mom's only reaction was, "Are you sure it's okay to be that far from home? Brandon needs tutoring support." The day I left for college, no one saw me off. No hugs, no tearful goodbyes. I wheeled my suitcase out to the bus station at 6 o'clock in the morning, just as the sky was starting to brighten. Brandon was still asleep. My mom was arguing with my dad about the power bill, and I told myself quietly, "This time, I won't look back." I started college with $420 in my account, a suitcase of clothes, and an old laptop donated by my high school math teacher through a program for underprivileged students. The dorm was cramped, and dinners were canned noodles and clearance bananas, but I'd never tasted freedom so sweet. I chose Oregon State University, over 3 hours from home. No one from my family came with me. I took the bus, then dragged my suitcase through the misty fall rain from the station to the campus gates. When I texted my mom to say I'd arrived, her only reply was, "Take care of yourself." Brandon didn't respond. He was busy planning a semester, off to reconnect with his creative energy. I worked at a coffee shop near campus from 5 to 9 every morning before class. On weekends, I cleaned conference rooms and the library for extra hours. Sometimes I edited essays for international students, $12 a paper. At night, I studied in the reading room, setting an alarm to make it to the late-night shift at the computer lab. Meanwhile, Brandon was posting photos from Breckenridge ski slopes on Instagram, captioned, "There's no such thing as failure, just stepping stones for artistic growth." He was fully funded by my parents to attend the New York Institute of Multimedia Design after dropping out of his first college just 4 months in because the curriculum lacked creativity. When I asked my mom, "Where did you get the money for a private school for him?" she replied flatly, "My son needs the right environment." "You got a scholarship, didn't you?" 3 years later, Brandon was back home again. His second school ended as abruptly as a party he didn't like. Then came the third, a fine arts institute in Santa Fe. He lasted 2 semesters. This time, the excuse was, "New Mexico's air is too dry. It stifles creativity." I kept pushing forward. My major was computer science, but I took extra courses in applied math and business to expand my options. Every dollar I earned was tracked in an Excel sheet, every expense scrutinized down to the penny. I couldn't afford to go home for Thanksgiving in my second year. I picked up extra holiday shifts at an electronics store. After graduation, I landed a software developer role at Techwork, a rising tech firm in Salt Lake City. I moved to Utah. In a used Honda I bought for $1,200 and rented a tiny studio overlooking a parking lot. I still packed lunch every day, reused old pens, and never once considered a vacation. Brandon, still living with our parents at nearly 30, tried his hand at reselling limited edition sneakers. He quit after 2 months because customers complained too much. When I called home to share that I got a raise 6 months into my job, my mom sighed. Brandon's under a lot of stress right now. Maybe don't bring up money. I smiled faintly and hung up. Then, I dove into online courses for JavaScript and Python to improve my promotion chances. At 30, I became a technical team lead. The salary was enough for me to buy a 2-bedroom apartment in downtown Salt Lake, a dream I once thought was out of reach. I invited a few close coworkers for a dinner to celebrate. One of them, Jessica, a senior developer from the 90s, listened to my story about Brandon and my family. She shook her head. "You don't owe them anything, Nicole. No one has the right to make you feel guilty for standing on your own." I knew she was right, but knowing didn't numb the sting I felt each time I saw a message from my mom pop up. "Brandon wants to start a new business. We think you could help him with a bit of startup money." I had hesitated before. I had given in, transferred $500 just to avoid the hassle. But the messages became more frequent, the tone more commanding, and then came a request I never saw coming. Something so outrageous it almost seemed like a joke. But to them, it was only fair because you're family. I signed the contract for the Penthouse on a softly sunlit afternoon in mid-April, the exact day marking 3 years since I was promoted at Techpor. Perched on the 38th floor of a glass tower in downtown Salt Lake City, the apartment spanned over 2,000 square feet with high ceilings, white oak floors, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-capped Wasatch Mountains. It took me nearly 7 years of saving just to afford the down payment. No loans from anyone, not a single dollar from my parents. Every cent in this home came from nights spent debugging until sunrise, from holidays canceled to meet project deadlines, and from hundreds of overtime hours that no one asked me to work. On move-in day, I stood in the empty living room, watching the afternoon light spill across the marble kitchen island, and cried not from exhaustion, but because for the first time in my life, I owned something that was entirely mine. No permission needed, no sharing required. I didn't rush to tell my family. My accomplishments had always been met with either sarcasm or an uncomfortable silence. But Jessica, my closest colleague, was different. She showed up with 2 bottles of white wine and a bouquet of sunflowers, which she placed right in the center of my kitchen. To Nicole, the woman who made her dream real without anyone steering the wheel for her, I smiled, but somewhere deep inside, a strange feeling lingered, as if I had just stepped into a world I wasn't supposed to belong to. 3 weeks later, I invited my family over for dinner to show them the new place. I still wanted, just once, to see my mother look at me with genuine pride. I had prepared the blueberry glazed roast she used to love, and made the cinnamon waffles my dad always had on weekends. As for Brandon, I bought the exact brand of craft beer he used to check in constantly online. They arrived nearly an hour late. My mom walked in, looked around the apartment, and said, "The building's management fees must be steep, huh?" My dad didn't offer congratulations. He just asked, "Are you sure you can handle the mortgage? The market's not looking great." Brandon strolled through, opening cabinets without asking, then muttered coldly, "It's fine, kind of lonely though, huh? No one else living here." I stayed quiet, set the table, forced a smile, trying to cling to the faintest sliver of hope. During dinner, the conversation revolved almost entirely around Brandon landing a spot at a startup, one he hoped won't be constrained by rigid corporate structures. My mom said that 3 times. My dad nodded each time, as if discussing an undiscovered genius. I gently mentioned I was just invited to lead a smart city project here in Salt Lake. My mom merely said, then pivoted to looking for a new apartment for Brandon because it's getting a little cramped living with us. After dinner, I stood at the sink washing dishes when I heard Brandon step out onto the balcony and loudly say into his phone, "Yeah, my little sister's living like this, penthouse and all. She's really lucked out." I rinsed my hands and stood still at the sink. Something inside me cracked. After that night, I didn't invite them again. But then they started showing up on their own. The following week, my mom called, voice sweet as honey. "Hey sweetheart, your dad and I thought we'd stop by this weekend to check that leaky faucet you mentioned." I had never mentioned any faucet. Next came Brandon. "Hey, I'm around downtown. Figured I'd swing by for some coffee at your place." Except he didn't ask, he just announced it and showed up 15 minutes later. That's when I began to realize this penthouse wasn't just my dream anymore. To them, it had become something else, a resource to tap into. One afternoon, during a remote meeting with a client, my doorbell rang nonstop. I glanced at the security camera. There they were, my parents and Brandon, each holding a large duffel bag as if they were moving in. Ever since that dinner night at my place, the calls and messages started pouring in, but not to check on how I was doing. They gradually took on a familiar tone, subtle hints, loaded suggestions, and repeated phrases designed to make me feel like I owed them something. One Monday morning, as I was prepping for a presentation with the executive director about a new project, my mom called. Her voice was sweet but urgent. "Nicole, I know you're busy, but Brandon, he's going through a tough time." I put her on speaker while adjusting my slides. Did he quit his job again? Not exactly. The company had some staffing changes, and they no longer aligned with his creative vision. It sounded exactly like what she'd said last time, and the time before that. She paused, then added, "You have such a spacious apartment, and that office. I was thinking if Brandon moved in for a bit, maybe you'd feel less lonely, and I'd feel more at ease." I froze in front of the screen. The air in the room thickened. "Mom, that's my work office, and I need my own space. Why are you being so selfish, Nicole?" Her tone lowered, dripping with disappointment. "You live alone. What's so hard about sharing with your own brother?" I didn't respond right away. In the background, I heard my dad cut in, "Just 6 months, just to help him get on his feet." 6 months, I thought. With Brandon, temporary always meant indefinite. Less than 3 days later, I received an email from Brandon. Not to apologize for being rude the other night, not to thank me for hosting the family, but with an Excel spreadsheet titled Startup Launch Budget. It included filming equipment rental, marketing costs, and even temporary lodging at supportive location, which clearly meant my apartment. I stayed silent, didn't reply. A week later, he texted, "Nicole, I need $700 to cover my credit card bill. The bank's threatening to freeze my account." I wasn't going to respond, but as usual, I caved. I transferred $400 with a note. "Last time, my mom called, the very next day. I don't want to bother you, but Brandon just got rejected from another interview. He's so down, hasn't eaten all day. Could you stop by, maybe bring some of his favorite food? I'm not available." Mom, you've changed so much. At that point, I felt suffocated. These were the same people who didn't show up to my graduation, who never checked in when I was sick in bed for a week. Now acting like I was responsible for every one of Brandon's failures. One afternoon, after back-to-back meetings, I came home and unlocked the door, only to stop cold. Brandon was sitting on my sofa, feet on the table, watching TV. I couldn't process what was happening. "Hey, you're back. Mom gave me a spare key last time I stopped by to grab my stuff. What are you doing in my home?" "Just relaxing. Your place has great AC." "When did you get a key?" "Last week. Mom said if you wouldn't open the door, just take it. I mean, it's the family's home. Everyone should be able to stay." I was shaking, not from fear, but from rage. Every inch of this home was built from my blood, sweat, time, and loneliness. And now they treated it like a communal Airbnb. I stood in the middle of my living room, feeling everything I'd worked for slowly being violated. And deep inside, a clear voice rose up. If I didn't stop this, they would take everything. I walked into my bedroom and closed the door. I needed to think, but that night, I couldn't sleep because the question kept echoing in my mind. What are they going to ask for next? Brandon's 35th birthday party was held at my cousin Elaine's house in the southern suburbs of West Valley. My mom sent the invite via text, ending it with, "The whole family has something important to discuss." I didn't like how she said the whole family, like I was just an accessory, but I kept the appointment, partly because I didn't want to be called the one who abandoned her blood, and partly because I wanted to know what they were planning. I chose a long navy blue dress, simple and modest. I let my hair down and went light on the makeup, not wanting to hear another word about me dressing like a city girl to show off. My gift for Brandon was a premium Bluetooth speaker, something he'd mentioned offhand one night. When I arrived, nearly everyone was already there. The house was full of balloons and loud laughter. My mom walked out from the kitchen, glanced at me, and looked away without a word. My dad was deep in conversation with an old friend, never lifted his head. Brandon was in the backyard laughing with two of his buddies, beer bottle in hand. I placed the gift on the table, nodded at a few relatives, then found a quiet spot near the grill. A few minutes later, my mom called everyone to the table. Her voice pitched unusually high. "All right, everyone, let's sit down. We've got something important to agree on after dinner." Dinner passed quickly. The main dish was Texas-style grilled beef, Brandon's favorite. No one asked how I was doing. All the conversations revolved around what Brandon had tried, was about to do, or was considering. My mom recounted his recent participation in an online startup seminar with such pride, as if it were a groundbreaking achievement. After the meal, everyone gathered in the living room. Brandon sat in the center of the couch, rubbing his knees like he was about to give a speech. My mom stood up and cleared her throat. "First off, thank you all for coming to celebrate, but today, besides Brandon's birthday, there's something very important to discuss." I felt my back tighten. Jessica had warned me once, when a controlling person starts using the word important instead of just asking, "Brace yourself." My mom turned to me, smiling that smile I hated most, and spoke slowly. "Nicole, you have a big apartment and you live alone. Brandon really needs a place to stabilize himself. Your father, and I think it's time he moved in with you." No one laughed. No one looked surprised. I was the only one who hadn't been told in advance. I sat up straight, trying to keep my voice even. "No, I've already told you, Mum. That's my personal space. I'm not willing to share it. You're his sister." She kept her tone soft. "Family should know how to make sacrifices for each other." I looked around the room, familiar faces staring back, some curious, some cold. No one spoke. "Up for me?" Brandon chuckled. "Nicole, no one's asking you to give me your place. Just crash there for a while. You're not exactly struggling, are you? You crashed at Mom and Dad's for over a decade. Now you want to move into my home too." The room fell silent. My mom's eyes sharpened. "Nicole," her voice hissed, "I can't believe how selfish you've become after everything this family's done for you." I stood up. What exactly did the family do? No one paid a cent for my college. No one showed up when I graduated. But now you expect me to share everything I've worked for. My mom stepped closer. My dad stayed seated, silent. The relatives began whispering and backing away. Brandon looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, like I was the last obstacle in his way. Then, her slap landed squarely on my cheek. A burning sting spread instantly. Everything froze. A long, heavy silence. No one cried out. No one moved. No one shielded me. I turned to face my mother. Her breathing was heavy, eyes blazing. "You'll regret your attitude tonight." I looked around at each person in that room. My dad turned away. Elaine stared at the floor. Brandon crossed his arms, unmoved. I picked up my purse, stepped backward. Before reaching the door, I said, "No, I won't regret this, but all of you will." I shut the door behind me, stepped into the night, and didn't look back. I drove home, in silence. My cheeks still burned from the slap, but what hurt more was the silence. Not a single person had spoken up for me, not one look of surprise or disapproval. That slap wasn't just from my mother. It was a collective declaration that I was never someone worth defending. By the time I pulled into the parking garage beneath my building, my hands were still shaking. I sat in the car for nearly 10 minutes, taking deep breaths. For the first time in years, I felt like a scolded 15-year-old, except now I was old enough to never let it happen again. I walked into my apartment, the only place I truly controlled. I poured a glass of water and set my phone on the kitchen counter. It lit up nonstop. "Nicole, I'm very disappointed in you. Is that how a daughter should act? Brandon said you embarrassed everyone. Family means forgiving and enduring, not walking away." I didn't read any further. I blocked each number one by one with a calmness that felt ice cold. Then I opened my email and scheduled an emergency appointment with the corporate attorney, who'd once helped me with Techer's NDA. The next afternoon, I sat in Carla Jensen's office with printed messages, screenshots from my apartment's security camera showing my parents' and Brandon's unannounced visits, and a written account of the slap in front of witnesses. Carla looked up after reading everything. "Nicole, this won't be easy to hear, but this is a pattern of emotional harassment and abuse. Does it still count as harassment if it's from family? The law doesn't excuse relatives when behavior crosses legal boundaries, and under Utah state law, that slap qualifies as misdemeanor physical assault." I swallowed hard. Carla continued, "I'll prepare a formal document, a cease and desist order, including a no trespassing notice for your home and workplace, with a warning of legal action if the harassment continues." We agreed to call it a personal boundary, respect, request. After the meeting, I didn't head home right away. I drove aimlessly through small roads around Liberty Lake. Autumn had arrived, and the trees were glowing with amber and gold. It was breathtaking, but I felt nothing, as if all the colors inside me had been torn apart. That evening, I visited an old website I'd bookmarked back in college, a directory of licensed therapists in Utah. I chose Dr. Vanessa Moore, who specialized in family trauma and scapegoat syndrome, when one family member is cast as the problem in an unhealthy system. A week later, I had my first session. The therapy room was in a cozy red brick building near Sugar House, with soft lighting and a cream-colored armchair. Dr. Moore listened for the entire 50-minute session without interrupting. When I finally stopped because I couldn't go on, she asked gently, "Nicole, are you aware you've just described a textbook emotionally abusive family system?" I just thought I was weak for being the only one who always felt angry and tired. "No, you're the only one still capable of sensing that something's deeply wrong." I sat frozen, not because I was shocked, but because someone had finally said what I'd been suspecting for 20 years. From that night on, I began journaling every evening, not to assign blame, but to clearly see what I'd long accepted as normal. That I was expected to give without asking in return. That I wasn't allowed to feel tired, that every success of mine was perceived as a threat to Brandon's status. 2 weeks later, I taped copies of Carla's letter on my front door and the elevator on the 38th floor, the one leading to my penthouse. The building staff had been briefed. Anyone trying to reach me without an appointment would be turned away, and security would be called if necessary. 3 days later, Brandon showed up, told the front desk I'd forgotten important documents. The cameras caught him storming off when denied access. I saved the footage to my personal hard drive. That night, I didn't feel triumphant, but I felt quiet. No more knocking, no more calls. A path towards resolution. I chose Evergreen Junction, a restaurant on the edge of Mill Creek, where warm yellow lights reflected off exposed brick walls, creating an atmosphere both cozy and composed, perfect for a conversation with no room left for emotional outbursts. I reserved a private room and informed the manager that if things escalated, staff were authorized to enter under the pretense of checking service. I arrived 20 minutes early. I brought 3 printed copies of a document, thick paper clipped into black folders. The contents were concise, direct, personal boundaries that were no longer negotiable. The first sentence read, "I'm not banning you from my life, but I will decide where you belong in it." My parents arrived on time. Dad wore a white button, his tie undone, avoiding my gaze. Mom clutched her purse, lips pursed tightly, walking in like she was preparing for a courtroom hearing. Brandon showed up 10 minutes late in a hoodie and sweatpants, hands in pockets, face unapologetic. I stood and greeted them. No one shook my hand. That was fine. I no longer expected it. Once the server poured water and left, I spoke first. "I invited you here today to clarify a few things. This isn't an apology dinner, and it's not about patching things up. It's about establishing something that should have existed long ago. Boundaries." My mother scoffed. "Boundaries with the people who gave birth to you and raised you." I said nothing. I opened the folder and placed one copy in front of each of them. Brandon flipped through his 4-2 lines and let out a chuckle. "What is this? A rental agreement?" I looked him directly in the eye. "If that's how you see it, then you really need to read it carefully." My father tried to keep his voice neutral. "Sweetheart, I know you're upset, but isn't this a bit much?" "No, Because when Mom slapped me in front of the entire extended family, and no one said a word, I realized this wasn't a safe space anymore. The table fell silent. I continued. There are 5 points in that document. 1. No one is allowed at my home or workplace without my consent. 2. There will be no further financial requests in any form or for any reason. 3. No one may speak on my behalf, spread misinformation, or distort my life story online or with relatives. 4. All communication, if it happens, must be controlling behavior, no criticism. 5. If any of these are violated, I will cut off all contact for at least 6 months. Brandon smirked. What are you, a lawyer now? This feels like a divorce settlement. Better that than being suffocated in something called family where no one shows respect. My mother slammed her palm on the table. You're disgracing this family. When did you become so cold and ungrateful? I sat still. From the moment I realized no one in this family ever asked, "Are you okay? Are you happy?" They only asked, "What can you give us?" My father lowered his head. My mother stood up abruptly, tore the paper in half, and threw it on the floor. If you think living alone in that penthouse makes you a winner, then go ahead and live. Just don't cry when you grow old and find no one beside you. I picked up the shredded paper, folded it, and slipped it into my bag. I don't need a family that only pulls me down to keep themselves on top, Brandon muttered as I stood. Sure, you're successful now, but you're still the same forgettable nerd no one cared about in high school. I looked at him for a long moment. And you're still 35 and relying on someone else to pay your rent. I walked out of the room without looking back. The city lights outside still glowed. No one in the restaurant noticed me. A woman walking with purpose, a folder in her hand, leaving behind a legacy called Blood Family that no longer carried the meaning of love. That winter, Salt Lake City welcomed snow early. My penthouse, bathed in crisp white light each morning, was eerily quiet. No more surprise doorbells, no more midnight texts saying family matters. Silence, after everything, had become the gift I gave myself. I started rearranging things in the apartment. My office became an art studio, not because I was good at painting, but because I needed a space where results didn't matter. The walls were covered in messy sketches, each stroke a reminder that I had stopped letting others define me. Jessica, the coworker I once invited to my housewarming, was the first to notice something had shifted. Nicole, you're not guarded anymore, you seem at peace. I didn't respond, I just smiled. Sometimes peace doesn't need to be declared. I joined a Saturday yoga class and became friends with a small group of women in their 30s, mature enough not to judge, open enough to truly listen. Over spring coffee, I briefly shared my story. A woman named Helen placed her hand gently on my shoulder and said, "I've been through something similar. I lost my mother but found myself. For the first time, I didn't feel like the odd one at the table." 3 months after that meeting at Evergreen Junction, I received an email from Dad. It wasn't long, just a few short lines. "I've been reading about the role of a father in a family. I never truly understood you, but if you're open to it, I'd like to start over as someone who was wrong and wants to learn how to do better." I read it over and over, maybe 10 times. I wasn't sure if I was moved or cautious, but I replied. I agreed to meet him at a small breakfast diner near Sugar House, a public place. Safe enough, warm enough. Dad arrived on time. He didn't bring Mom. He didn't offer excuses. He didn't say, "Let's forget the past." He just talked about how he'd started cleaning his own kitchen, doing his own laundry, and seeing a therapist. "After that dinner, I never stood up for you, and I'm sorry." I didn't forgive him right away, but I gave him a chance, and for the first time in my life, he listened without interrupting. As for Brandon, word got back to me through one of his old classmates. After my parents cut off financial support, Brandon had to move out and share an apartment with 2 strangers in West Jordan. He worked part-time at an auto repair shop, not a creative job, not some startup dream, but real labor. I didn't laugh when I heard that. I didn't feel vindicated, just a quiet sense, like watching someone finally hit the ground after falling for so long. My mother is still silent, still no admission of wrongdoing. I've blocked her from contacting me, but sometimes Dad tells me she sits by the window at home, watching neighborhood kids play, like a stranger to the world. I expect nothing from her. No more hopes, no more resentment, because not everyone has the courage to heal. I don't know what lies ahead, but I know this. From now on, I decide who gets to enter my life, and they'll have to walk in with kindness. On an early summer evening, I hosted a small dinner at home, inviting my new friends and Jessica. We sat on the balcony, watching the sunset behind the Wasatch Range, red wine in hand, gentle laughter in the breeze. Helen tilted her head toward me. If you could go back, would you want anything to be different? I shook my head. No, because without those losses, I would have never known what wholeness feels like. And as I looked around the apartment, once a battlefield, now a real home, I finally understood. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by where no one uses love as leverage to make you forget your worth. Nicole's story is a powerful reminder that blood ties should never be used as a license for control or abuse. Peace doesn't come from pleasing everyone in your family. It comes from having the courage to protect your own boundaries. In a society where filial duty is still heavily idealized, Nicole proved that real love must come with respect. And sometimes building a healthy life means letting go of toxic relationships, even if they share your last name. What are your thoughts on Nicole's journey and the boundaries she set with her family? Share your perspective in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt real-life stories about family and freedom.